How far would a mother go to protect her child from an unimaginable predator? In Philadelphia, one woman's desperate act of revenge shocked the nation, and it all began with a horrifying secret. At first glance, the Johnson family seemed ordinary. Sarah Johnson, a devoted mother in her early 40s, balanced a demanding job as a nurse with the responsibility of raising her daughter Lucy. Her husband, Michael, was well regarded in their community, a charismatic man with a stable job and an outward demeanor of calm confidence. Their modest row house in the heart of Philadelphia was a haven, or so it appeared. Lucy, a shy but fiercely intelligent young woman, had just turned 16. With a deep love for art and dreams of becoming a graphic designer, she was the light of Sarah's life. For years, Lucy and Sarah shared an unshakable bond, the kind only forged between a mother and daughter weathering life's ups and downs together. But something about their family dynamic felt uneasy, an unspoken tension that couldn't quite be explained. Michael's relationship with Lucy, though outwardly cordial, seemed overly controlling. His mood would shift unpredictably, and Sarah found herself walking on eggshells around him, dismissing her discomfort as stress from her long shifts at the hospital. And then, one day, everything unraveled. It was a cold winter evening when Sarah made the call that would forever alter the course of her life. Her voice trembled as she told the 911 dispatcher, "I had to stop him. I had no choice." By the time police arrived at their home, Michael lay dead in the basement, riddled with 12 bullet wounds. Sarah stood beside him, hands trembling, revolver still warm in her grasp. Nearby was her daughter Lucy, barely able to stand, pale with fear and exhaustion. But the story didn't end with Michael's death. What had driven Sarah to pull the trigger 12 times? What unspeakable truths had been uncovered in the moments before? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how had Lucy survived years of torment at the hands of the man who was supposed to protect her? Sarah Johnson met Michael 5 years ago through mutual friends. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly a man who had his life together, a man who could offer stability to a single mother like Sarah. She had been raising Lucy on her own for most of her life, and Michael's interest in not only her, but her daughter as well felt like a rare blessing. They married within a year, and for a while life seemed better. Michael appeared to be a doting stepfather. He supported Lucy's artistic ambitions, buying her supplies, and even attending her school exhibitions. Sarah, often exhausted from her demanding shifts as a nurse, felt grateful for Michael's presence. He seemed to fill a void, helping their small family feel complete. To the outside world, they looked like a picture-perfect family, a stable home in the heart of Philadelphia, a supportive husband, and a bright, ambitious daughter. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Over time, Michael's demeanor began to change. Small, seemingly insignificant things started to stand out. He became more controlling, particularly with Lucy. He would criticize her friends, limit her social activities, and insist on knowing where she was at all times. He disguised his actions as protectiveness. But Sarah noticed Lucy growing more withdrawn. Lucy had always been vibrant and talkative, but her once sunny demeanor dimmed. She stopped inviting friends over. Her laughter, once a constant in their home, grew rare. She avoided eye contact with Michael, tensing whenever he entered the room. Sarah noticed these changes but dismissed them as growing pains. After all, Lucy was navigating the challenges of young adulthood, and every young person struggled with that. What Sarah didn't realize was that her daughter was living in fear. Behind closed doors, Michael was a predator. He manipulated Lucy with a mix of threats and twisted justifications. He told her that no one would believe her if she spoke up, that Sarah would never take her side. He controlled her through fear, repeatedly warning her that if she ever revealed a secret, there would be consequences, not just for her, but for Sarah as well. For years, Lucy carried the weight of this horror in silence. It wasn't until she discovered she was pregnant that the secret became unbearable. Terrified and unsure what to do, she confided in her mother one evening, trembling as she explained everything: the abuse, the threats, the pregnancy. Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. Horrified by what she was hearing, Sarah's heart shattered. She was consumed by a tidal wave of guilt for not recognizing the signs, for trusting Michael, for failing to protect Lucy. But alongside the guilt came an overwhelming rage, a fury so deep it consumed every fiber of her being. Her daughter was supposed to be safe under her roof, and the very man she trusted to protect them had shattered that safety. In that moment, Sarah vowed that Michael would never hurt Lucy again. His breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a cold, quiet night, and Sarah had just returned home from work. The house felt unusually still. She called out for Lucy, but heard no reply. Concerned, she made her way through the house, finally hearing faint voices coming from the basement. What Sarah saw when she opened the basement door would haunt her forever. Michael stood over Lucy, forcing a handful of pills into her trembling hands. His voice was low and threatening as he demanded she swallow them. Lucy, visibly shaken, was pleading with him, tears streaming down her face as she tried to resist. Sarah froze for a moment, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Then, like a switch flipping, her paralysis gave way to action. She stormed into the basement, shouting for Michael to stop. Her sudden entrance startled him, but instead of retreating, he turned on her, his voice rising in anger, accusing her of interfering where she didn't belong. In that moment, something snapped in Sarah. She saw the terror in Lucy's eyes, the years of fear and abuse reflected in her trembling frame. She saw the man she once trusted as a protector now exposed as a monster. The basement was dimly lit, cluttered with old boxes, tools, and remnants of a life that now felt so distant to Sarah. She had stumbled upon a scene that no parent should ever witness. Her daughter, Lucy, cornered and shaking, was trapped in a battle of wills with a man who had betrayed every ounce of trust Sarah had once placed in him. Sarah's heart pounded as she took in the sight. Michael, towering over Lucy, his voice sharp, laced with threats, as he held out the pills. His words were cruel and calculated, pressing her to comply. Lucy's face was streaked with tears, her lips trembling as she muttered desperate pleas for him to stop. For a brief moment, Sarah froze, caught between disbelief and fury. But then, the weight of Lucy's confession, the years of abuse her daughter had endured, and this final act of control crashed over her like a tidal wave. "What are you doing?" Sarah's voice tore through the tense air, startling Michael. He turned toward her, his expression flashing from surprise to anger. Michael's reaction was swift. "Stay out of this, Sarah," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "You don't understand what's going on here. I'm fixing a mistake." "A mistake?" That's what he called it. A mistake. Sarah's hands began to shake, her nails digging into her palms as she stepped closer, her gaze darting between Michael's furious face and Lucy's tear-soaked one. "You're hurting her," Sarah hissed, her voice cracking. "You've been hurting her for years, and you think you can just what? Erase it?" Michael's tone shifted, cold and dismissive. "You're overreacting. This isn't what you think. I'm doing what's necessary. She'll thank me later." Sarah felt her chest tighten as her rage bubbled over. "Thank you," she spat. "You've destroyed her life. You've destroyed our lives. How dare you even?" Michael took a step toward her, raising a hand as if to silence her. "Sarah, calm down. This is for the best. You don't want to make this worse." But his words only added fuel to the fire. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, her breaths coming fast and shallow. Every instinct in her screamed to protect her daughter. Every moment of trust she had given this man, every ounce of love she once felt, had curdled into something dark and vengeful. In that moment, Sarah's eyes darted to the nearby workbench, where Michael had left an old revolver. She lunged for it, her movements quick and fueled by adrenaline. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" Michael's voice rose, panic lacing his words as she turned the gun on him. Her hands shook as she held the weapon, her knuckles white against the cold steel. Tears streamed down her face, but her grip remained steady. "You don't get to hurt her anymore," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Michael's face twisted in a mix of fear and defiance. "Put the gun down. You're going to regret this." But Sarah didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The first shot rang out, echoing through the small basement like a thunderclap. Michael staggered back, a look of shock frozen on his face. But Sarah didn't stop. One shot turned into two, then three, then four. Her finger kept pulling the trigger, each shot punctuating years of anger, betrayal, and anguish. 12 rounds in total. By the time she stopped, Michael's body lay motionless on the cold concrete floor. Sarah stood over him, her chest heaving, the revolver slipping from her trembling hands. She couldn't feel the weight of what she had done. Not yet. Lucy stood frozen in the corner, her back pressed against the wall. Her wide, tear-filled eyes stared at her mother, her breath hitching with shallow gasps. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, as she processed what had just happened. "Mom," Lucy's voice was barely a whisper, shaky and broken. Sarah turned to her daughter, her heart breaking all over again at the sight of Lucy's terrified face. She crossed the room in unsteady steps, wrapping her arms around her. "It's over," Sarah murmured, her voice soft, almost inaudible. "He can't hurt you anymore." But there was no time to process, no time to grieve. Sarah knew what she had to do. She pulled away from Lucy, reaching for her phone with trembling fingers. The 911 operator answered on the other end. Sarah's voice wavered as she spoke. I shot him. He was going to hurt my daughter. Please send someone." The minutes that followed felt like hours. The sound of sirens grew louder until flashing lights bathed the street outside. The police entered the basement cautiously, their voices stern and commanding. Sarah raised her hands in surrender, her eyes fixed on Lucy, who stood behind her, clutching herself tightly. "I had no choice," Sarah told the officers as they handcuffed her. "I had to protect her." The officers escorted Sarah out of the house, her head bowed in resignation. Lucy, left behind in the care of first responders, watched silently as her mother disappeared into the back of a police car. The nightmare was over, but for both Sarah and Lucy, the journey was just beginning. When the police arrived at the Johnson home, the scene they encountered was both shocking and tragic. Michael's body lay lifeless on the cold basement floor, surrounded by scattered objects and the remnants of a violent confrontation. Sarah, her hands trembling, stood nearby in stunned silence, her eyes fixed on the ground. Lucy, pale and visibly shaken, was seated in the corner, clutching a blanket that a paramedic had placed around her shoulders. The officers moved cautiously, securing the scene and collecting evidence. Sarah was taken into custody without resistance. She told them everything. How she had walked in on Michael threatening Lucy, how years of abuse had led to that moment, and how she felt there was no other way to stop him. As investigators pieced together the events of that night, more horrifying details emerged. Forensic evidence from the basement corroborated Lucy's claims. The pills that Michael had been forcing into her hands were later identified as harmful substances intended to terminate the pregnancy. Marks on Lucy's wrists and arms indicated years of physical coercion, and the DNA evidence confirmed what Lucy had revealed to her mother, that Michael was the father of her unborn child. The investigation didn't stop at the physical evidence. Detectives dug into the family's history, uncovering a troubling pattern. Lucy's behavior over the years, her withdrawal from friends, her sudden drop in academic performance, and her reluctance to be alone with Michael, painted a damning picture of long-term abuse. Neighbors and acquaintances, though initially shocked by the revelations, began to recall subtle signs they had overlooked. Some spoke of overheard arguments, Lucy's distant demeanor, or the controlling behavior Michael exhibited toward his stepdaughter. Slowly but surely, the story of what had been happening in the Johnson household came to light. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Sarah's trial. The case had captured national attention, sparking debates about justice, morality, and the limits of self-defense. The prosecution argued that Sarah's actions were premeditated. They claimed that shooting Michael 12 times was excessive, pointing to her retrieval of the revolver as evidence that she intended to kill him rather than simply protect her daughter. They painted a picture of Sarah as an enraged wife who had taken the law into her own hands. But Sarah's defense told a very different story. Her lawyers framed her as a mother pushed to her breaking point, a woman who had endured years of manipulation and deceit at the hands of her husband, only to discover the full extent of his monstrous actions. The defense leaned heavily on her psychological state at the time of the shooting, arguing that her actions were the result of an emotional and maternal instinct to protect her daughter from immediate danger. Lucy's testimony became the emotional centerpiece of the trial. On the stand, she recounted the years of abuse she had endured, her voice shaking as she described the threats, the fear, and the moment her mother burst into the basement to save her. She explained how Michael had controlled every aspect of her life, using fear to keep her silent. Her words brought many in the courtroom to tears. When Sarah took the stand, her testimony was raw and unfiltered. She described the overwhelming guilt she felt for not recognizing the signs earlier, for trusting Michael, and for not being able to protect Lucy sooner. "I did what any mother would do," she said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't let him hurt her anymore. I just couldn't." The trial lasted several weeks, with both sides presenting their arguments. The media followed every development, and the public opinion was deeply divided. Some saw Sarah as a hero, a mother who had done what the justice system couldn't. Others viewed her as a vigilante who had taken a life in an act of rage. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: manslaughter. Sarah was sentenced to 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5. The court acknowledged the mitigating circumstances of Michael's abuse and the immediate threat to Lucy, but maintained that Sarah's actions had exceeded the boundaries of self-defense. The reaction to the verdict was mixed. Advocacy groups for domestic abuse survivors argued that Sarah's sentence was too harsh, given the years of trauma she and her daughter had endured. Others believed that justice had been served, emphasizing the importance of due process and the dangers of vigilantism. Lucy, who had been present in the courtroom for every day of the trial, wept as the sentence was read. She later told reporters that she would never stop fighting for her mother's release. "She saved my life," Lucy said. "She did what she had to do. She's not a criminal. She's a mom." The case left a lasting impact on the public, sparking discussions about the legal system's handling of domestic abuse cases and the lengths to which someone might go to protect the ones they love. For Sarah and Lucy, the road to healing had only just begun. Lucy's journey toward healing was neither swift nor simple. After years of being silenced, she struggled to find her voice again. Therapy became a lifeline, a place where she could begin to unravel the years of manipulation and fear that Michael had woven around her. Each session peeled back layers of trauma, revealing scars that went far deeper than the physical marks on her wrists. Raising her child brought its own set of challenges. The child was a constant reminder of the past, but also a beacon of hope. Lucy found strength in motherhood, determined to break the cycle of pain and build a life where love, not fear, guided her actions. Slowly, she began to trust again, to let people in, to allow herself moments of joy without the shadow of her past looming over her. Art, which had once been her refuge, now became a powerful tool for expression. Each stroke of her brush was a step toward reclaiming her identity, away from the darkness that had defined her youth. But the echoes of Michael's abuse were always there, haunting her in quiet moments, in the glances of strangers who recognized her from the news, in the whispered conversations that fell silent when she entered a room. The path to rebuilding her life was littered with reminders, but with each day, she grew a little stronger, a little braver. Behind bars, Sarah grappled with the complexities of her own emotions. Regret washed over her in endless waves, not for killing Michael, but for not seeing the signs sooner. She replayed moments in her mind, searching for clues she had missed, wondering if there had been a way to protect Lucy without resorting to violence. At night, in the solitude of her cell, she questioned herself. Could there have been another way? Was she a monster for what she had done, or a mother who did what was necessary? Letters from Lucy kept her tethered to hope, reminding her that, in Lucy's eyes, she was still a protector, a savior. Yet, the weight of taking a life hung heavy on her soul. Over time, Sarah began to find a fragile acceptance. She had acted out of love, out of desperation, and while she couldn't undo what had happened, she could try to make peace with it. Her days were spent in reflection, in trying to understand how she could heal and support Lucy from a distance. She found solace in the idea that her sacrifice might have given her daughter a second chance at life, a life free from the nightmares that once haunted her. The Johnson family's tragedy sent shockwaves through their community. Neighbors whispered about the secrets that had lurked behind closed doors. T2-air sympathies divided between sorrow for Lucy and condemnation for Sarah's actions. Some viewed Sarah as a tragic figure, a mother driven to extremes to protect her child. Others saw her as a cautionary tale about the dangers of taking justice into one's own hands. Local media picked apart every detail, feeding a public eager for answers, for someone to blame. Support groups rallied around Lucy, offering her resources and understanding, while others questioned how such horrors could unfold unnoticed in their own neighborhood. Conversations about abuse, about the failures of the system, about the thin line between justice and revenge permeated dinner tables and community meetings. For the extended family, the fallout was devastating. Relatives struggled to reconcile the Michael they thought they knew with the predator he had become. Relationships frayed, torn apart by guilt, shame, and the endless question of how they could have missed the signs. Yet amid the turmoil, there was a growing movement advocating for Sarah's release, arguing that her actions, though violent, stemmed from a place of love and protection. Petitions circulated, and letters flooded the governor's office, pleading for clemency, for understanding. As time passed, the community began to heal, their anger and confusion slowly giving way to empathy. The Johnson family's story became a catalyst for change, sparking dialogues about the hidden realities of domestic abuse and the lengths to which people will go to protect their loved ones. In the end, the echoes of this tragic story lingered, not just as a tale of violence and betrayal, but as a poignant reminder of the complexities of human nature and the power of a mother's love.